When Miriam Hartwell's son married his mail-order bride from Chicago, she never expected to be banished to the kitchen during her own family's wedding ceremony. Treated like hired help in the home she'd built with her own hands through 29 years of frontier hardship. But sometimes the most powerful response to being pushed aside isn't anger or tears. It's the quiet courage to step forward and claim exactly where you belong. What would you do if your own family tried to hide you away on the most important day of their lives? The gunshot that woke Miriam Hartwell at dawn wasn't meant for her, but it changed everything anyway. She bolted upright in her narrow bed, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Outside her window, the October morning of 1867 painted Deadwood's muddy streets in shades of gold and shadow. Another shot echoed off the Black Hills, followed by whooping laughter from the saloon district. Just miners celebrating another strike, she whispered to herself, but her hands shook as she reached for her worn cotton robe. At 53, Miriam had survived too much to be easily frightened. She'd buried a husband when Benjamin was only 3. She'd fought off claim jumpers with nothing but a shotgun and fierce determination. She'd nursed half the town through the cholera outbreak of '64. But today felt different. Today carried the weight of change she couldn't control. The letter lay on her kitchen table where she'd left it the night before, its careful words burning in her memory. Mother, I found a bride through correspondence. Miss Catherine Wells of Chicago. The wedding is October 15th. 3 days away. 3 days to prepare for a daughter-in-law she'd never met, chosen by a son who'd made the decision without asking her opinion. Miriam lit the oil lamp with steady fingers, refusing to let her emotions show even to herself. The boarding house was stirring around her. Boots creaking on floorboards above, the sound of Mr. Patterson's morning cough, the distant clatter of someone trying to be quiet in the hallway. She had 8 boarders to feed before they headed to the mines. Responsibilities didn't pause for personal worries. But as she mixed biscuit dough, her mind wandered to Benjamin working deep underground. His broad shoulders bent over silver, or that might make him rich or might kill him. He was 28 now, old enough to make his own choices. Old enough to want a wife who could give him children and companionship through the long Dakota winters. Still a mail-order bride. The phrase stuck in her throat like dust. Morning, Mrs. Hartwell. Dr. Samuel Morrison appeared in her kitchen doorway, medical bag in hand and exhaustion lining his kind face. He'd been boarding with her for 2 months while his own house was being built, and she'd grown comfortable with his quiet presence. Early call? She asked, not looking up from her work. The Hendersons. Mary's time has come, and it's not going easy. He accepted the cup of coffee she poured without being asked. Thought I'd grab a bite before heading back. Take some biscuits with you. Mary will need her strength. He nodded, studying her face in the lamplight. You seem troubled this morning. Miriam's hands stilled in the dough. Samuel Morrison was the kind of man who noticed things. The slight tremor in a patient's voice, the way someone held their shoulders when pain struck deep. She'd learned to be careful around him. Benjamin's getting married, she said finally. Congratulations. When do I get to meet the lucky young lady? That's just it. None of us have met her. She's coming from Chicago. One of those correspondence arrangements. Samuel set down his coffee cup with unusual care. Ah, you disapprove? It's not my place to approve or disapprove. But I've seen what happens when people marry strangers out of necessity rather than affection. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Have you met her family? She has relatives coming for the wedding. That's all I know. The unspoken question hung between them. What kind of woman marries a man she's never seen? What kind of desperation drives such choices? Footsteps thundered down the stairs, and Jake Morrison, no relation to the doctor despite the shared name, burst into the kitchen with the energy of a man half his 40 years. Mrs. Hartwell, you hear about the new strike up Cedar Creek? His eyes gleamed with the fever that gripped men when silver called their names. They're saying it's the richest vein yet discovered. Could change everything for this town. And could turn out to be nothing but fool's gold, she replied, but kindly. Jake had been chasing strikes for 3 years, always certain the next one would make his fortune. Not this time. I got it on good authority from a man who knows the assayer personally. He grabbed 2 biscuits from the plate she offered. Benjamin coming in on this one? Smart boy like him shouldn't miss an opportunity like this. Miriam felt something cold settle in her stomach. What kind of opportunity? Investment opportunity. Buy into the claim now before word spreads and prices go crazy. Of course, it takes real money. More than most miners see in a year. Dr. Morrison raised an eyebrow. How much money? $500. Maybe more, depending on how many partners they take on. $500. More money than Miriam had ever seen at one time. More than her boarding house earned in 6 months. The kind of money that might explain why Benjamin suddenly needed a wife from a wealthy Chicago family. I should get back to Mary Henderson, Dr. Morrison said, rising from his chair. He caught Miriam's eye with a look that said he understood exactly what she was thinking. Some decisions are made for reasons that have nothing to do with the heart. After he left, Miriam stood alone in her kitchen, the weight of realization settling around her shoulders like a heavy shawl. Benjamin wasn't marrying for love or even companionship. He was marrying for money, for the chance to buy into a silver claim that might lift him out of the grinding poverty that had marked both their lives. She couldn't blame him. She'd taught him to be practical, to seize opportunities when they presented themselves. But the thought of him binding himself to a stranger for the sake of $500 made her chest ache with sorrows she couldn't name. The sun climbed higher over Deadwood, painting the kitchen in warm yellow light. Soon the other boarders would come down for breakfast, filling her space with conversation and the comfortable routine of morning meals. She had work to do, responsibilities that wouldn't wait for her to sort through complicated feelings about sons and brides, and the choices people made when hope and desperation tangled together. But first, she allowed herself one moment of honest grief for the dreams she'd held without realizing it. Dreams of Benjamin finding love the way she had with his father. Dreams of welcoming a daughter-in-law who chose their family for reasons that had nothing to do with money. Then she wiped her hands clean, squared her shoulders, and began preparing breakfast for 8 hungry men who trusted her to start their days with something nourishing and warm. After all, some things remained constant even when the world shifted beneath your feet. People still needed feeding. Life still demanded living. And mothers still loved their sons, even when those sons made choices that broke their hearts in ways they'd never expected. The sound of boots on the stairs told her the day was beginning in earnest. Whatever came next, mysterious brides, silver claims, or the 1,000 small compromises that made up frontier life, she would meet it with the same steady determination that had carried her through 29 years of widowhood. But deep in her heart, a question echoed like those morning gunshots. What kind of woman was coming to claim her son, and what would that mean for the life she'd built with such careful effort in this rough Dakota town? The stagecoach arrived on Tuesday with the subtlety of a thunderclap, its wheels churning up dust clouds that could be seen from 3 blocks away. Miriam watched from her front porch, hands gripping the wooden railing as the driver hauled on the reins and brought his team to a snorting, stamping halt directly in front of her boarding house. The passengers who emerged looked as out of place in Deadwood as silk flowers in a coal mine. The first woman stepped down with the careful movements of someone unaccustomed to rough travel. She wore deep purple velvet despite the afternoon heat, and her silver hair was arranged in elaborate curls that must have taken an hour to pin. Everything about her spoke of money and social position, from her jeweled brooch to the way she held herself as if expecting the world to rearrange itself for her convenience. Mrs. Pemberton, I presume, Miriam murmured, recognizing Catherine's aunt from Benjamin's brief description. The second passenger required the driver's assistance to navigate the coach's high step. Mr. Pemberton appeared to be a man who'd grown soft from years of desk work. His face flushed from the journey and his expensive suit wrinkled beyond salvation. He moved with the careful precision of someone whose greatest daily challenge involved choosing between different restaurants. But it was the third passenger who made Miriam's breath catch in her throat. Catherine Wells stepped from the stagecoach like a princess descending from a fairy tale carriage. Her traveling dress was the color of spring leaves, perfectly fitted despite the long journey from Chicago. Her blonde hair caught the afternoon sunlight, and her skin had the pale perfection of someone who'd never worked a day under the Dakota sun. She was beautiful. More than beautiful. She was exquisite in the way of fine china or expensive paintings, the kind of loveliness that made ordinary people feel clumsy and rough by comparison. "You must be Mrs. Hartwell." Catherine's voice carried the cultured tones of Chicago society, each word carefully shaped and polished. "I've heard so much about you from Benjamin's letters. Miss Wells, welcome to Deadwood." Miriam stepped forward, forcing a smile that felt strange on her face. "I trust your journey wasn't too difficult?" "Oh, it was perfectly dreadful," Mrs. Pemberton announced, fanning herself with a lace handkerchief. "The dust, the heat, the absolutely primitive conditions. I cannot imagine how people choose to live in such places." The insult hung in the air like gun smoke. Miriam felt her spine stiffen, but before she could respond, Catherine placed a gentle hand on her aunt's arm. "Aunt Margaret, please remember that this is Mrs. Hartwell's home, and it will be mine as well very soon." The reproof was delivered with such sweet politeness that it took a moment for its sharpness to register. Mrs. Pemberton's face flushed deeper than the afternoon heat could explain. "Of course, dear. I simply meant." She trailed off, perhaps recognizing that any explanation would only make things worse. "Please come inside," Miriam said, leading them toward the boarding house. "You must be tired. I've prepared rooms for you on the second floor." As they climbed the stairs, Miriam found herself stealing glances at Catherine. The girl moved with unconscious grace, but there was something else beneath the polished surface. A tension in her shoulders, a carefulness in the way she spoke that suggested she was performing rather than simply being herself. "How long have you and Benjamin been corresponding?" Miriam asked as she showed them to their rooms. 8 months, Catherine replied. "His first letter was so thoughtful, so different from the others I received. He wrote about building something lasting, about the importance of family and home. Others." A flush crept up Catherine's neck. "There were several gentlemen who responded to my advertisement. But Benjamin's letters stood out immediately. The confession hung between them, honest and somehow vulnerable." Miriam felt her opinion of the girl shift slightly. Whatever had driven Catherine to advertise for a husband, she was at least truthful about the process. "And what made you choose to leave Chicago?" Miriam asked gently. Catherine's composure wavered for just a moment, and Miriam caught a glimpse of something raw beneath the perfect exterior. "Papa's business failed after the Great Fire," she said quietly. "There were debts and, well, opportunities for unmarried women of good family are somewhat limited when there's no money for a proper dowry." The honesty was unexpected and somehow heartbreaking. Here was a young woman who'd lost everything she'd known and was gambling her entire future on letters from a stranger in a place she'd never seen. Mrs. Pemberton sniffed disapprovingly. Catherine's father was always too trusting in his business dealings. If he'd listened to my dear husband's advice. "Aunt Margaret." Catherine's voice carried a warning note that suggested this was an old argument. "I'm simply saying that proper precautions might have prevented this entire unfortunate situation." "This situation," Catherine said with quiet dignity, "is my engagement to a hard-working man who's building a life in a growing territory. I hardly consider that unfortunate." The exchange revealed layers of family tension that Miriam hadn't expected. Catherine might be young and sheltered, but she had steel in her spine when pushed too far. "Benjamin won't be home from the mine until evening," Miriam said, hoping to change the subject. "Perhaps you'd like to rest after your journey." "Actually," Catherine said, "I'd prefer to see something of the town if you wouldn't mind showing me around. I want to understand the place that will be my home." Mrs. Pemberton looked horrified. "Catherine, surely you don't intend to walk through those streets in broad daylight? How else am I supposed to learn about my new home?" The question was directed at her aunt, but Catherine's eyes met Miriam's with a direct gaze that suggested she was genuinely curious about Miriam's opinion. "I think that's a sensible idea," Miriam said, "though you might want to change into something more practical. The streets can be challenging." An hour later, Miriam found herself walking down Deadwood's main street with a young woman who traded her elegant traveling dress for a simpler brown skirt and white blouse. Catherine still looked like a lady, but at least she no longer looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. "It's smaller than I expected," Catherine said, taking in the mixture of permanent buildings and temporary structures that line the street. "Most mining towns start this way. If the silver holds out, it'll grow. If not," Miriam shrugged. "Ghost towns dot the territory like old bones." They passed the general store, where Mr. Kowalski waved from behind his counter. The blacksmith's hammer rang against iron in steady rhythm. Children played in the dust outside the schoolhouse, their laughter mixing with the distant sound of stamp mills processing ore. "Benjamin writes that he works underground," Catherine said as they paused outside the Silver Dollar Mines office building. 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. "It's dangerous work, but it pays better than farming or cattle ranching." "Have you ever been down into the mines?" The question surprised Miriam. "Once. After the cave-in 3 years ago when they were bringing up the injured. It's not a place for someone who fears small spaces or darkness." Catherine was quiet for a moment, staring at the mine entrance where men emerged covered in dust and sweat, their faces marked by exhaustion and the constant awareness of danger. "Is Benjamin happy?" she asked suddenly. The question was so unexpected that Miriam stopped walking. "What do you mean?" "In his letters, he writes about practical things, work, plans for the future, the importance of building security. But he never writes about joy, about things that make him laugh or dreams that have nothing to do with money." Catherine turned to face her directly. "I'm wondering if he's happy, or if he's simply surviving." The insight was startling coming from someone so young. Miriam found herself really looking at Catherine for the first time, seeing past the pretty face and careful manners to something more substantial underneath. "Benjamin is careful," she said finally. "He learned early that life can change without warning. His father died when he was very young, and we've had to fight for everything we have. So he doesn't believe in taking chances on things like love?" The question cut straight to the heart of what Miriam had been thinking since receiving Benjamin's letter. "What about you? Are you taking a chance on love? Or are you simply seeking security?" Catherine's laugh was soft but held no humor. "I suppose that's what I'm hoping to discover. Whether it's possible to find both in the same person." They walked back toward the boarding house in comfortable silence, both lost in thoughts they weren't ready to share. But as they climbed the front steps, Catherine paused with her hand on the door. "Mrs. Hartwell, may I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Were you happy? In your marriage, I mean." Benjamin mentions his father with such respect, but he never talks about love between you. The question pierced something deep in Miriam's chest. "I was very happy. Robert was a good man who became my best friend as well as my husband. We had 7 wonderful years together before the fever took him." 7 years, Catherine repeated softly. "That doesn't seem like nearly enough." It wasn't, but it was enough to know what marriage can be when 2 people truly choose each other. Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "Then you understand why I'm nervous about tomorrow night." "Tomorrow night?" "Benjamin and I are having dinner together. Alone for the first time. Everything until now has been letters and imagination. Tomorrow we discover whether we're compatible in person, or whether we've both made a terrible mistake." The vulnerability in her voice made Miriam's heart soften despite her reservations about this whole arrangement. Catherine might be young and sheltered, but she was also honest about her fears and realistic about the risks she was taking. "Benjamin is a good man," Miriam said gently. "Whatever else happens, you can trust him to treat you with respect and kindness." "And is that enough? Respect and kindness?" The question hung between them as they entered the boarding house, where Mrs. Pemberton was waiting with a list of complaints about her room, the noise from the street, and the general primitive conditions of frontier life. But Miriam found herself thinking about Catherine's question long after the girl had gone upstairs to rest. Was respect and kindness enough to build a marriage? Or did love require something more, the kind of spark that couldn't be created through correspondence, no matter how thoughtful the letters? Tomorrow night would bring answers that would shape 3 lives forever. And suddenly, Miriam realized she was almost as nervous as the bride-to-be about what those answers might reveal. The plate crashed against the kitchen floor with a sound like thunder, sending pieces of her grandmother's china flying in every direction. Miriam stared down at the broken fragments, her hands trembling from more than just the accident. She'd been setting the table for Benjamin and Catherine's private dinner when her fingers simply gave up their grip, as if her body had decided to express what her mind couldn't handle. 24 hours had passed since Catherine's arrival, and the boarding house felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Mrs. Pemberton had spent the morning complaining loudly about everything from the coffee to the creaking floorboards. Mr. Pemberton had locked himself in his room with a bottle of whiskey, emerging only to mumble about the uncivilized wilderness his niece had chosen to inhabit. But it was Catherine herself who had Miriam most unsettled. The girl had spent the day moving through the house like a ghost, touching things with careful fingers. The faded wallpaper in the parlor, the worn wooden banister, the simple dishes Miriam used for everyday meals. She asked endless questions about everything. How long had the boarding house been operating? Where did the water come from? What happened during the terrible winter of '65? It was as if she was trying to memorize every detail of a life she might soon share, or perhaps saying goodbye to the possibility of a different future entirely. "Let me help with that." Dr. Morrison appeared in the kitchen doorway, his medical bag in one hand and genuine concern creasing his weathered face. He'd been making more frequent stops at the boarding house since Catherine's family arrived, though Miriam suspected his visits had little to do with medical emergencies. "I'm fine," she said automatically, then looked down at the china scattered across her kitchen floor. "Actually, no. I'm not fine at all." Samuel knelt beside her, carefully gathering the larger pieces while she swept up the smaller fragments. His presence was oddly comforting, steady and undemanding in a way that let her thoughts settle. "Want to talk about what's really bothering you?" he asked quietly. Miriam paused, holding a piece that had once been part of the plate's delicate rose pattern. "Benjamin came home from the mine early today. He was so nervous he could barely speak. Kept asking if Catherine seemed disappointed, if she'd said anything about changing her mind. And has she? I don't know. That's what terrifies me." She dropped the fragment into the dustpan with unnecessary force. What if they meet tonight and realize they're completely wrong for each other? What if Benjamin's sacrificing his happiness for money that might not even exist? What if she's expecting a different kind of man than the son I raised? Samuel was quiet for a moment, his gentle hands making quick work of the cleanup. What if they surprise you? What if two people can find something real even when they start with practical reasons? Do you really believe that's possible? I've seen stranger things in 20 years of medicine. Hearts are unpredictable organs, Miriam. Sometimes they know things the mind hasn't figured out yet. Before she could respond, footsteps thundered down the back stairs, the servant's entrance that led to the small room where Benjamin had been staying since giving up his regular bedroom to Catherine's relatives. Benjamin burst into the kitchen like a man fleeing a fire, his dark hair still damp from washing and his Sunday shirt buttoned crooked. He looked younger than his 28 years, and more frightened than Miriam had seen him since childhood. "Ma, I can't do this." The words tumbled out in a rush. What was I thinking? She's beautiful and educated and used to fine things. I'm just a miner who smells like sulfur and limestone. When she sees me cleaned up, really looks at me, she's gonna realize what a mistake this whole thing is. Dr. Morrison cleared his throat diplomatically. "I should check on Mrs. Henderson and the new baby. Good luck tonight, Benjamin." After he left, Miriam turned her full attention to her son. Benjamin stood in the middle of her kitchen like a lost child, his hands shaking as he tried to straighten his shirt. "Sit down," she said firmly, guiding him to a chair. "Let me fix that." Her fingers worked automatically, rebut-toning his shirt and smoothing his hair while her mind raced. This was her son. The boy who'd faced down claim jumpers without flinching, who'd worked 14-hour days in dangerous mines to keep them both fed, who'd never shown fear of anything that could hurt him physically. But the possibility of emotional rejection had reduced him to trembling. "Benjamin, look at me." She cupped his face in her hands the way she had when he was small. "You are a good man. You work hard, you're honest, and you treat people with respect. Any woman would be lucky to have you. But what if she's not looking for lucky? What if she's looking for refined and wealthy and sophisticated? Then she's looking for the wrong things, and you'll both be better off knowing that now rather than after you're married. The truth of her own words surprised her. Somewhere in the last day, without realizing it, she'd stopped worrying about whether Catherine would accept Benjamin and started worrying about whether Benjamin should accept Catherine. "Tell me something," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "When you read her letters, what made you want to write back? What drew you to her specifically?" Benjamin's face softened slightly. "She wrote about wanting to build something meaningful. Not just a house or a bank account, but a real life with someone who shared her values. She said she was tired of pretending to be someone she wasn't just to fit into society's expectations." "And what did you write to her about?" "Work, mostly. The mine. Plans for the future. What life is like here." He paused, looking embarrassed. "I told her about you, about how you raised me alone and built this business from nothing. I said I wanted to find someone with that same kind of strength." Miriam felt something warm unfold in her chest. "You wrote about me? How could I not? You're the strongest person I know." I told her that any woman who married me would have to understand that I come from good people, even if we don't have money or fancy educations. The back door opened, and Catherine herself appeared, wrapped in a blue shawl that brought out the color of her eyes. She'd changed into a simple dress, still finer than anything Miriam owned, but more suitable for a quiet dinner than the elaborate gowns she'd arrived wearing. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, but her gaze went straight to Benjamin. He shot to his feet so quickly he nearly knocked over his chair. "Miss Wells, Catherine, you look beautiful." A flush crept up Catherine's neck. "Thank you. You clean up quite nicely yourself, Mr. Hartwell." They stood there staring at each other like actors who'd forgotten their lines, and Miriam realized with sudden clarity that neither of these young people had any idea how to begin this conversation that would determine their futures. "I've set dinner in the parlor," she said gently. The boarding house dining room seemed too formal, and the kitchen too casual. "The parlor feels like neutral ground." Catherine smiled gratefully. "That sounds perfect." But as Benjamin offered his arm and led Catherine toward the parlor, Miriam caught a glimpse of something that made her stomach tighten with new worry. Through the front window, she could see Mrs. Pemberton standing on the porch, clearly eavesdropping on whatever conversation was about to unfold between the young couple. Whatever Benjamin and Catherine discovered about each other tonight, they wouldn't be discovering it in private. And Miriam had learned enough about Catherine's aunt to know that the woman's interference could destroy fragile beginnings before they had a chance to grow into something real. The question was, should she warn them, or let them navigate this crucial evening without knowing they had an audience? "You cannot possibly be serious about this ridiculous charade." Mrs. Pemberton's voice cut through the evening air like a blade, and from her position at the kitchen sink, Miriam could hear every word of the conversation taking place on the front porch. She'd been washing dishes from Benjamin and Catherine's dinner, a meal that had ended abruptly when Catherine excused herself to get some air. Now it seemed the girl was getting more than fresh air. She was getting a lecture. "Aunt Margaret, please lower your voice." Catherine's response was barely audible, but the tension in it carried clearly. "I will not lower my voice. This entire situation is intolerable. That young man may be pleasant enough, but he's completely unsuitable for someone of your background. Did you see the state of his hands? The way he struggled with basic conversation. He's a laborer, Catherine, not a gentleman." Miriam's hands stilled in the dishwater. She knew she should move away, give them privacy, but her feet seemed rooted to the kitchen floor. "Benjamin worked hard all day in dangerous conditions to pay for tonight's dinner," Catherine said, her voice growing stronger. "Those hands you find so offensive have built a life from nothing. I consider that admirable, not shameful." "Admirable?" Mrs. Pemberton's laugh was sharp and cold. "Child, you've clearly been away from civilization too long. This place has affected your judgment. A proper lady doesn't marry beneath her station, regardless of circumstances." "And what exactly is my station now, Aunt Margaret? Father lost everything. We have no money, no business, no prospects back in Chicago. I'm 23 years old with no dowry and no husband. Exactly what kind of gentleman do you think is going to offer for me? The raw honesty in Catherine's voice made Miriam's chest ache. She'd suspected the girl's situation was desperate, but hearing it stated so baldly brought the reality into sharp focus. Your uncle and I have discussed this. We're prepared to support you until a more suitable arrangement can be made. There are widowed gentlemen in Chicago who might be persuaded. Widowed gentlemen who want young wives to care for their children and warm their beds in exchange for basic survival? Catherine's voice cracked slightly. That's not marriage, Aunt Margaret. That's employment with a different name. Miriam found herself holding her breath, waiting for Mrs. Pemberton's response. When it came, it was colder than the October wind. At least it would be employment with people of your own class. This frontier fantasy you've constructed is just that, a fantasy. You think you can play house with a minor and somehow transform yourself into a pioneer woman? You'll be dead of cholera or childbirth within 2 years. Maybe. But at least I'll be living my own life instead of the one you think I should want. Footsteps moved across the porch, and Miriam heard the front door open and close. A moment later, Catherine appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face pale but her chin set with determination. I apologize if we disturbed you, she said quietly. I hope our conversation wasn't too audible. Miriam dried her hands on her apron, studying the young woman's face. Audible enough. Are you all right? Catherine sank into one of the kitchen chairs as if her legs had given up supporting her. I don't know. I honestly don't know anything anymore. What did you think of Benjamin? Really think. Not what your aunt expects you to think. For the first time since arriving in Deadwood, Catherine's careful composure completely cracked. He's nothing like what I expected. His letters made him sound so confident, so sure of himself and his place in the world. But tonight, she paused, searching for words. Tonight he seemed as lost as I feel. That surprises you? Everything surprises me. He asked me what I really wanted from life, not what I thought he wanted to hear. When I told him I was tired of pretending to be someone I'm not, he said he understood completely. Catherine looked up, meeting Miriam's eyes. He said he'd been pretending too, acting like he had everything figured out when really he was just trying not to drown. The insight startled Miriam. She'd raised Benjamin, watched him grow from boy to man, but she'd never heard him express that kind of vulnerability to anyone. What else did you talk about? Books, mostly. Turns out we've both read more than our letters suggested. He's taught himself engineering and geology by borrowing books from the mine foreman. I've been reading everything I could get my hands on about Western territories and mining. Catherine's smile was rueful. We're both probably more educated than we admitted in our correspondence. And what did you conclude about each other? Catherine was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the worn kitchen table. I think we might actually like each other. Not just tolerate each other or find each other acceptable, but genuinely enjoy each other's company. She paused. Is that enough to build a marriage on? Before Miriam could answer, heavy footsteps on the back stairs announced Benjamin's arrival. He appeared in the kitchen doorway looking as unsettled as Catherine, his carefully combed hair now disheveled and his Sunday shirt untucked. Catherine, I wanted to apologize for ending dinner so abruptly. I heard voices outside and thought you might want privacy to speak with your family. You heard. Catherine's face flushed crimson. Enough to know that your aunt doesn't approve of me. She's not wrong about the differences in our backgrounds. Our backgrounds don't matter, Catherine said firmly. What matters is whether we can build something together that's better than what either of us could create alone. Benjamin pulled out the chair next to hers, sitting down with the careful movements of someone trying not to spook a skittish animal. And do you think we can? I think. Catherine took a deep breath. I think we should try, but I need you to understand something first. If we go through with this marriage, there's no going back to Chicago for me. My aunt has made it clear that choosing you means choosing a completely different life. And if we don't go through with it, then you're out the money you've already spent on arrangements, and I have to figure out how to survive as an unmarried woman with no family support and no resources. The stark reality of their situation settled over the kitchen like dust after a windstorm. These weren't two young people falling in love. They were two people trying to make the best decision they could with limited options and uncertain futures. But as Miriam watched them sit together at her kitchen table, she saw something that gave her hope. They were being honest with each other in a way that many married couples never achieved. They were acknowledging their fears instead of pretending they didn't exist. "Benjamin," she said quietly, "what do you want? Not what you think is practical or wise, but what you actually want." Her son looked at Catherine for a long moment before answering. "I want to stop being afraid that I'm not good enough for anyone to choose freely. I want to build something with someone who sees the value in what we're creating together. And you, Catherine? I want to stop apologizing for not being the woman other people think I should be. I want to find out who I actually am when I'm not performing for anyone else's approval." Miriam felt tears prick her eyes, though she couldn't have said exactly why. "Then maybe the question isn't whether you're right for each other. Maybe the question is whether you're brave enough to find out." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and carrying the distant sound of miners heading home from the late shift. In a few hours, the boarding house would settle into its nighttime quiet, and tomorrow would bring the final day before the wedding. But right now, in her kitchen, two young people were making a choice that would echo through the rest of their lives. And for the first time since receiving Benjamin's letter about his mail-order bride, Miriam thought they might actually have a chance at happiness together. The only question was whether Catherine's family would let them find out. The letter that arrived with Friday morning's mail delivery made Mrs. Pemberton smile for the first time since stepping foot in Deadwood. Miriam watched from the kitchen window as the older woman tore open the envelope with eager fingers, her face lighting up as she read its contents. Whatever news had arrived from Chicago, it was exactly what Catherine's aunt had been hoping for. "Catherine, dear, come quickly." Mrs. Pemberton's voice carried through the boarding house with unusual excitement. "The most wonderful news has arrived." Miriam dried her hands and stepped into the hallway, where Catherine descended the stairs with obvious reluctance. The girl had spent a restless night. Miriam had heard her pacing in the room above the kitchen until well past midnight. "What is it, Aunt Margaret?" "A letter from Mr. Whitmore's attorney. You remember Charles Whitmore? He was your father's business partner before the fire." Mrs. Pemberton waved the paper triumphantly. "He's written with a most generous offer." Catherine went very still. "What kind of offer?" "He's proposing marriage, dear. He needs a wife to care for his 3 children, and he's prepared to overlook your father's debts in exchange for your acceptance. The attorney says he can have you back in Chicago within the month, with a proper wedding in December." The color drained from Catherine's face. "Charles Whitmore is 60 years old. His wife died in childbirth last spring." "Exactly. An experienced gentleman who understands the practical nature of marriage. No foolish romantic notions to complicate things." Mrs. Pemberton folded the letter carefully. "He's offering security, Catherine. Real security, not this frontier fantasy you've been entertaining." "And what about Benjamin? What about him? You barely know the young man. Surely you can see that this is a far superior arrangement." Miriam found herself holding her breath as she watched Catherine struggle with emotions that flickered across her face like shadows. Fear, relief, disappointment, and something that might have been grief all appeared and vanished in quick succession. "I need to think," Catherine said finally. "Think? Child, what is there to think about? This is the answer to our prayers." "Our prayers?" Catherine's voice sharpened. "Or just yours?" Before Mrs. Pemberton could respond, the front door burst open with enough force to rattle the windows. Jake Morrison stumbled inside, his face flushed with excitement and his clothes covered in rock dust. "Mrs. Hartwell, is Benjamin here? I got news that'll change everything." "He's at the mine," Miriam said, stepping forward. "What's happened?" "The Cedar Creek claim, the one we've been talking about investing in, they hit the mother lode yesterday afternoon. Biggest silver strike this territory's ever seen." Jake's grin stretched from ear to ear. "Men are getting rich overnight. Benjamin gets in on this, he'll have more money than he knows what to do with." Mrs. Pemberton's expression shifted instantly from triumph to calculation. How much money are we discussing? Could be thousands, maybe tens of thousands, if the vein runs as deep as they think. Jake pulled off his hat, running dusty fingers through his hair. Course, the buy-in price has gone up too. Now they're asking $800 minimum. But for a man with a wife from a good family, someone who could maybe contribute to the investment, the unspoken suggestion hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Catherine's dowry, whatever money the Pembertons might contribute, could be Benjamin's ticket to real wealth. $800, Mrs. Pemberton repeated slowly. Then her smile returned, sharper than before. How very interesting. Miriam felt something cold settle in her stomach. She could practically see the wheels turning in the older woman's mind, calculating how this new information might affect Catherine's value in the marriage market. I should find Benjamin and tell him, Jake said, already heading for the door. This kind of opportunity don't come along twice in a lifetime. After he left, the hallway fell into uncomfortable silence. Catherine stood at the bottom of the stairs, her face pale and her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Well, Mrs. Pemberton said finally, this does change things considerably, does it? Catherine asked quietly. Of course it does. If this mining venture proves as profitable as suggested, your young man might actually become a suitable husband after all. Though we'd need to ensure proper financial arrangements before any wedding takes place. Financial arrangements? A marriage contract, dear. Something that protects your interests and ensures you're not simply funding his business ventures without proper compensation. Mrs. Pemberton's voice took on the tone she might use to explain something to a slow child. We'd need to contribute to his investment, naturally, but in exchange for a guaranteed return and legal protections. Miriam watched Catherine's face as understanding dawned. You want to buy Benjamin. I want to secure your future, which is what I've been trying to do since we arrived in this godforsaken place. Mrs. Pemberton's patience was clearly wearing thin. A successful mining investor is far different from a simple laborer. With proper financial backing and guidance, he could become quite respectable. And if the mine fails, if the silver runs out or the claim proves worthless, then you'll still have Charles Whitmore's offer to fall back on. We simply delay responding to his attorney until we see how this mining situation develops. The casual way Mrs. Pemberton discussed manipulating both men's lives made Miriam's hands curl into fists. Catherine was being treated like a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder, and Benjamin like an investment opportunity to be evaluated and managed. Excuse me, Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need some air. She fled through the front door, leaving Mrs. Pemberton alone with Miriam in the hallway. The older woman turned, clearly expecting agreement or at least understanding from Benjamin's mother. Surely you can see the wisdom in ensuring proper financial protections for both young people, she said. What I see, Miriam replied carefully, is two people trying to figure out if they can build a life together being turned into pawns in someone else's game. Mrs. Pemberton's eyes narrowed. This is hardly a game, Mrs. Hartwell. This is your son's future we're discussing. Without proper backing, he'll never amount to more than a common laborer. My family's investment could transform his prospects entirely. And what does your family expect in return for this investment? Influence, naturally. Guidance in important decisions. Insurance that Catherine's interests are protected. Mrs. Pemberton smoothed her skirts with satisfied precision. After all, we can hardly allow an inexperienced young man to risk our niece's security on foolish ventures. The truth hit Miriam like a physical blow. The Pembertons weren't offering partnership, they were offering control. Benjamin would get his mining investment, but at the cost of his independence. Catherine would get security, but only as long as she remained under her family's direction. I think, Miriam said slowly, you should discuss these arrangements with Benjamin and Catherine directly. They're the ones getting married, after all. Of course, though I trust you'll help them understand the practical benefits of accepting guidance from more experienced parties. After Mrs. Pemberton swept upstairs, Miriam stood alone in her hallway, feeling as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. What had started as a simple mail-order marriage was becoming something far more complicated. A web of financial obligations and family politics that could trap both young people in a life neither of them had chosen. The question was, did Benjamin and Catherine have the courage to refuse offers that promised security at the cost of their freedom? Or would they, like so many others, decide that some cages were more comfortable than the uncertainty of genuine choice? Outside, she could hear Catherine pacing on the front porch, and Miriam knew the girl was facing the hardest decision of her young life. The safety of a loveless marriage to a Chicago widower, the gilded cage of a financially controlled marriage to Benjamin, or the terrifying freedom of choosing love without guarantees. Tomorrow was their wedding day, but first they had to decide what kind of marriage they actually wanted. The sound of horses galloping hard toward town shattered the quiet Saturday morning air, and even before Miriam could reach her front window, she knew something had gone terribly wrong. Dr. Morrison's buggy careened down Main Street at dangerous speed, his medical bag bouncing on the seat beside him as he fought to control his panicked horse. Behind him rode two miners, their faces grim beneath layers of dust and sweat. "Mine accident," one of them shouted as they thundered past. "Cave-in at the Silver Dollar. Men trapped inside." Miriam's blood turned to ice. Benjamin had left for work before dawn, whistling softly as he always did on Saturday mornings. The Silver Dollar mine was where he spent 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, digging silver from the earth that might kill him. She grabbed her shawl and ran for the door, but Catherine was already there, her face white as chalk and her hands pressed against the window glass. "How many men?" Catherine called to the second rider. "Don't know yet. Maybe 6, maybe more. Happened about an hour ago in the deep tunnel." The miner pulled up his horse, recognizing her as Benjamin's bride-to-be. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but Benjamin Hartwell was working that section today." The words hit like physical blows. Catherine swayed on her feet, and Miriam caught her arm to steady them both. "Is he?" Catherine couldn't finish the question. "Don't know nothing yet. They're still trying to clear the rubble. Could be they're all fine, just trapped until we can dig them out." The miner's voice carried forced optimism. "Dr. Morrison's heading there now with supplies." After the riders disappeared toward the mine, Miriam and Catherine stood together on the porch, neither speaking. The morning had been bright and clear, perfect weather for a wedding that was supposed to take place in 6 hours. Now the sunshine felt like mockery. "I should go to the mine," Catherine said suddenly. "There's nothing you can do there. The miners know their business better than anyone. But I should be there. If Benjamin is hurt, if he—" Catherine's voice cracked. "Yesterday I was worried about choosing between marriage offers, and now he might be dead." The raw pain in her voice made something click into place for Miriam. "You love him." It wasn't a question. Watching Catherine's face crumple with fear and grief, Miriam realized that sometime in the past few days, the practical arrangement between two strangers had transformed into something real. "I didn't mean to," Catherine whispered. "I was trying to be sensible, to make a good decision based on practical considerations. But when he talked about wanting to build something meaningful, when he listened to my fears without trying to fix them or dismiss them, I started hoping we might actually be happy together. And now I'm terrified I'll never get the chance to find out." Mrs. Pemberton emerged from the house, fully dressed despite the early hour. She'd been awake when the news arrived, probably planning her next move in the complicated chess game she'd been playing with Catherine's future. "How many men were involved in this accident?" she asked briskly. "At least 6, Miriam replied. "And what are the survival rates for this type of incident?" The coldly practical question made Catherine flinch. "Aunt Margaret, please. I'm simply trying to assess the situation realistically. If your young man doesn't survive, we need to make alternate arrangements immediately. Mr. Whitmore's attorney is expecting a response to his proposal. Benjamin might be dying, and you're thinking about other marriage prospects?" Catherine's voice rose with disbelief. "I'm thinking about your future, which is more than you seem capable of doing." Mrs. Pemberton's tone sharpened. "This accident, tragic as it may be, simply demonstrates the inherent dangers of this lifestyle. Mining is a young man's profession precisely because so few miners live to old age. That's enough. Miriam's quiet words carried enough authority to silence both women. Catherine, if you want to go to the mine, I'll walk with you. Mrs. Pemberton, if you can't offer support instead of criticism, perhaps you should stay here. The three women stared at each other for a tense moment. Then Catherine straightened her shoulders with visible effort. Yes, I want to go to the mine. I need to know what's happening. The walk to the Silver Dollar took 20 minutes that felt like hours. Main Street buzzed with activity as word of the accident spread through town. Wives and mothers clustered in worried groups, sharing information and offering comfort. Children were kept indoors, away from the adult fears that hung over Deadwood like storm clouds. At the mine entrance, organized chaos reigned. Men worked in careful shifts, clearing debris from the collapsed tunnel, while others operated the ventilation bellows to keep fresh air flowing to anyone who might be trapped below. Dr. Morrison had set up a makeshift medical station near the office building, his supplies laid out with military precision. Any word? Miriam asked Jake Morrison, who stood near the rescue operation covered in dirt and sweat. They can hear voices down there. Least 4 men are alive, maybe more. But the rubble's thick, and they got to move it slow or risk another collapse. Jake wiped his face with a grimy sleeve. Could take hours to reach them. What about Benjamin specifically? Can't tell voices apart from this far up. We just know there's people alive down there, and that's something. Catherine moved closer to the mine entrance, as if physical proximity could somehow reach Benjamin wherever he was trapped in the darkness below. Her wedding dress hung in Miriam's wardrobe, pressed and ready for a ceremony that might never happen. Miss Wells. A young miner approached hesitantly. I'm Tom Bradley. I work the same shift as Benjamin most days. Do you know if he's... Catherine couldn't finish the question. I was supposed to be working that tunnel today, but Benjamin switched shifts with me. My wife's been sick, and he said I should stay home with her. Tom's voice was thick with guilt and gratitude. If Benjamin's trapped down there, it's because he was helping my family. The revelation hit Catherine like another blow. Not only might Benjamin be injured or dying, but he was in danger because he'd shown kindness to a fellow worker. The man she'd been preparing to marry was exactly who she'd hoped he might be. Generous, selfless, willing to sacrifice for others. How long do these rescues usually take? She asked. Depends on how deep they are and how much rock came down. Could be hours, could be days. Tom glanced toward the mine entrance where the rescue crews worked with careful urgency. But I'll tell you this, Benjamin's smart and he's tough. If anyone can survive down there, it's him. As if summoned by his words, a shout went up from the rescue team. Men clustered around the mine entrance, voices calling back and forth in coded signals that meant something important had happened. Dr. Morrison grabbed his medical bag and rushed toward the commotion, leaving Miriam and Catherine to wait with the other families who'd gathered to watch and pray and hope. In the distance, church bells began ringing the noon hour. 6 hours until the wedding was supposed to begin. 6 hours to discover whether the marriage everyone had been debating and planning and worrying about would happen at all. But standing there in the dust and chaos of the rescue operation, watching Catherine's face tight with fear and love, Miriam realized something important. The financial arrangements and family politics and practical considerations that had seemed so crucial yesterday didn't matter at all. What mattered was the young woman beside her, who'd discovered she loved a man she might lose before she ever got the chance to tell him so. Benjamin's voice calling Catherine's name from the darkness underground made her heart stop beating for 3 full seconds. Catherine! Catherine, are you up there? She ran toward the mine entrance before anyone could stop her, dropping to her knees at the edge of the shaft where rescue workers had cleared enough debris to create a small opening. Dust and rock chips scattered as she pressed her face close to the gap. Benjamin, I'm here. Are you hurt? Bruised up some, but nothing broken. We got 5 men down here all alive. Tommy Richardson's got a busted leg, but Dr. Morrison can fix that. His voice echoed strangely through the tunnel, making him sound both close and impossibly far away. Catherine, what time is it? Past noon. Why? Our wedding's supposed to start at 6 o'clock. Despite everything, the fear, the chaos, the very real possibility that the man she loved might die before they could marry, Catherine found herself laughing. Only Benjamin would be worried about their wedding schedule while trapped under tons of rock. "Don't you worry about the wedding," she called back. "Just focus on staying safe until they can get you out. Actually, I've been thinking about something down here in the dark. Something important I need to tell you." The rescue foreman held up his hand for silence. Communication with the trapped miners was crucial, and every word had to be heard clearly. "What is it?" Catherine asked. "I know about the Chicago man. Your aunt's been talking to half the town about that marriage offer you got. And I know about the silver claim too." Jake told everyone before the cave-in happened. Catherine's stomach dropped. "Benjamin, please don't. Let me finish. I've been lying here thinking about what I want to say to you, and this might be my only chance." His voice grew stronger, more determined. "I don't want you to marry me because I might get rich from some mining claim. And I sure don't want you to feel like you got to choose me because you're afraid of going back to Chicago." Around the mine entrance, the rescue workers had stopped their digging to listen. This wasn't the usual desperate conversation between trapped miners and their families. This was a man proposing marriage from the bottom of a collapsed mine shaft. "What are you saying?" Catherine asked, though she thought she knew. "I'm saying I want you to choose me because you want to. Not because it's practical or safe or because your aunt thinks it's a good investment. I want you to marry me because you think we might actually be happy together." Mrs. Pemberton appeared at Catherine's shoulder, her face tight with disapproval. "Catherine, this is hardly the time for such discussions. The young man needs to focus on survival, not romantic declarations." "With respect, ma'am," Benjamin's voice carried clearly from the tunnel. "This is exactly the time. Man faces his own death, he gets clear about what matters most. And what matters most to me is that Catherine knows she's got real choices, not just the ones other people think she should make." Catherine felt tears running down her cheeks, though she couldn't have said whether they were from fear, relief, or something deeper. Here was Benjamin, trapped and possibly dying, more concerned about her freedom than his own safety. "Benjamin Hartwell," she called down, "are you proposing to me from the bottom of a mine shaft?" "I reckon I am. Though I got to warn you, if you say yes, you'll be marrying a man who might not have two coins to rub together. This silver claim everyone's excited about? I decided this morning I'm not buying into it." The announcement sent murmurs through the crowd of gathered townspeople. Jake Morrison pushed forward, his face confused. "But Benjamin, this is the chance of a lifetime. Why would you pass up getting rich?" "Because getting rich ain't the same as building something that lasts. That claim's going to make some men wealthy and leave others broke, depending on how the silver runs. But a marriage built on honest affection between two people who respect each other, that's something you can count on no matter what happens to the price of silver." Dr. Morrison appeared at Catherine's side, having finished organizing his medical supplies. "How's he sounding down there?" "Clear-headed." "Very clear-headed," Catherine replied. "Clearer than he's ever been." "Good. That means he's not suffering from oxygen deprivation or head injury. We should have them out within the hour." Mrs. Pemberton gripped Catherine's arm with surprising strength. "Catherine, you cannot possibly be considering accepting a proposal made under these circumstances. The young man is clearly not thinking rationally." "Actually, Aunt Margaret, I think he's thinking more rationally than anyone else involved in this situation." Catherine gently pulled free from her aunt's grasp. "Benjamin, are you absolutely certain about the silver claim? Jake's right. It could change your whole life." "Our whole life, you mean?" "And yeah, I'm certain. I've seen what silver fever does to men. Turns them into people they don't recognize, makes them gamble everything on chances that might not pay off. I'd rather build something steady with my own hands than risk everything on luck." The wisdom in his words surprised everyone listening, including Miriam. Her son had grown into a man who understood the difference between opportunity and obligation, between wealth and worth. "Besides," Benjamin continued, "I got a better investment in mind." "What's that?" Catherine asked. "You, if you'll have me. Not because it's safe or practical, but because I think we might build something together that's worth more than all the silver in the Black Hills. The rescue foreman signaled his men to resume digging. The opening was almost large enough for the first trapped miner to squeeze through. "Catherine," Mrs. Pemberton said urgently, "you need to consider this decision very carefully. Mr. Whitmore's offer still stands. A secure future in Chicago with an established gentleman versus an uncertain life with a miner who's just refused a fortune." "You're right, Aunt Margaret. I do need to consider this decision carefully." Catherine moved closer to the mine opening. "Benjamin, can you hear me clearly?" "Every word." "Then hear this. I don't want to marry Mr. Whitmore. I don't want to go back to Chicago. And I don't want to marry you for your potential silver claim." She took a deep breath. "I want to marry you because when I thought you might die today, I realized that losing you would break my heart in ways I never expected." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." The cheer that went up from the gathered townspeople was loud enough to rattle windows 3 blocks away. Even the rescue workers paused in their digging to applaud before returning to their urgent work. Mrs. Pemberton stood silent for a long moment, her face cycling through emotions that ranged from fury to resignation. "Very well," she said finally, "but don't expect your uncle and me to fund this romantic folly. If you insist on choosing love over security, you'll do it without our financial support." "We wouldn't want it any other way," Catherine replied firmly. From underground, Benjamin's laughter echoed through the tunnel like music. "Catherine Wells, you just made a trapped miner the happiest man in Dakota Territory." "Catherine Hartwell," she corrected. "As of 6 o'clock tonight, if you can manage to get yourself out of that hole in time for our wedding." "Ma'am, nothing short of another mountain falling on me is going to keep me from marrying you today." The rescue foreman looked up from his work, grinning despite the serious situation. "Well then, we'd better get you boys out of there. This town's got a wedding to attend." The first man to emerge from the collapsed mine wasn't Benjamin, but Tommy Richardson, who had to be carried out on a stretcher with his legs splinted and his face pale from pain and blood loss. Dr. Morrison worked quickly, checking Tommy's pulse and examining his injuries, while the rescue team prepared to bring up the next miner. Catherine watched from nearby, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "How much longer?" she asked the rescue foreman. "Hard to say. We got to bring them up one at a time, real careful like. Any sudden movement could bring down more rock." He wiped sweat from his forehead with a dusty sleeve. "But your man's smart. He's making sure the hurt ones come up first, even though he could probably squeeze through that opening himself." The information didn't surprise Catherine. Benjamin's selflessness was one of the things that had drawn her to him, even when she'd been trying to approach their marriage as a practical arrangement. Mrs. Pemberton had withdrawn to the shade of a nearby building, where she sat fanning herself and pointedly ignoring the rescue operation. Mr. Pemberton stood beside her, looking uncomfortable but unwilling to contradict his wife's obvious displeasure. "Catherine." Dr. Morrison approached, having stabilized Tommy Richardson for transport to his office. "I need to ask you something important about the wedding." "What is it?" "Are you absolutely certain you want to go through with the ceremony today? Even if Benjamin comes out of that mine uninjured, he's going to be exhausted and probably covered in dirt and rock dust. We could postpone." "No." The firmness in her own voice surprised Catherine. "We're getting married today. Benjamin and I have both made our choice, and I don't want to give anyone else time to interfere with it." Samuel smiled, understanding exactly what she meant. "In that case, I should warn you that the minister has been pacing outside the church for the past hour, wondering whether to postpone the service. Tell him the wedding is happening as scheduled. 6 o'clock, just like we planned. Even if the groom shows up looking like he's been buried alive, especially then." The second miner emerged 10 minutes later, followed by the third. Both were bruised and shaken but essentially unharmed. Only Benjamin and one other man remained trapped below. As the afternoon wore on, the crowd around the mine began to thin. Wives took their rescued husbands home to be cleaned up and tended to. Children were called in for early suppers. The excitement of the rescue was giving way to the practical business of evening chores and preparations. But Catherine remained, along with Miriam and a handful of others who had personal stakes in the outcome. Miss Catherine, Jake Morrison approached hesitantly. I wanted to say something about Benjamin's decision, about not buying into the silver claim. What about it? Well, I've been thinking maybe he's right. Maybe chasing silver strikes ain't the smartest way to build a life. Jake removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. My wife's been asking me to consider other kinds of work. Says she's tired of watching me gamble our future on holes in the ground. The admission revealed a side of Jake that Catherine hadn't expected. Beneath the excitement and silver fever was a man struggling with the same questions about security and risk that she and Benjamin had been facing. What kind of work? She asked. Well, there's talk of bringing the railroad through Deadwood. That means construction jobs, permanent work that don't depend on whether the silver holds out. He glanced toward the mine entrance. Benjamin's got the right idea. Build something steady first, then take chances with what's left over. Before Catherine could respond, another shout went up from the rescue team. The fourth miner was being brought to the surface, which meant Benjamin was the last man still trapped underground. Benjamin, Catherine called down the shaft. Are you ready to come up? Just checking to make sure nobody else is down here. Can't have any man left behind on my wedding day. And, all clear. But Catherine, I got to warn you about something. Her heart clenched with new fear. What's wrong? I look like I've been wrestling with a mountain and lost. You sure you want to marry a man who's covered in enough dirt to plant potatoes in? Despite everything. The fear, the exhaustion, the emotional roller coaster of the past few hours. Catherine found herself laughing. Benjamin Hartwell, I'd marry you if you were covered in mud from head to toe. Well then, you're about to get your chance. The rescue team began the careful process of bringing Benjamin to the surface. Catherine could hear them calling instructions back and forth, coordinating the delicate operation of lifting a full-grown man through a narrow opening without causing another collapse. Easy now. Watch his shoulders. That's it. Keep coming. And then Benjamin's head appeared at ground level, followed by his shoulders and arms. He was indeed covered in dirt and rock dust, his clothes torn and his hair gray with debris. But his eyes were bright and focused, and when he saw Catherine waiting for him, his smile was bright enough to power the town's oil lamps. Strong hands pulled him the rest of the way out of the mine, and Catherine threw herself into his arms without caring about the dirt or the crowd of onlookers or anything else but the solid reality of his presence. You're all right, she whispered against his dusty shirt. I'm more than all right. I'm getting married in 2 hours to the most remarkable woman in Dakota Territory. Dr. Morrison approached with his medical bag. Benjamin, I need to check you over before you go anywhere. Doc, I'm fine. Bruised up some, but nothing broken. Humor me. It's been a long day for everyone, and I'd prefer to know for certain that my friends are in good health before they make major life decisions. The examination was quick but thorough. Benjamin had indeed escaped serious injury, though he'd sport some impressive bruises for the next few weeks. You're clear for wedding activities, Dr. Morrison announced. Though I'd recommend a bath first. Already planned on it. Benjamin turned to Catherine. You still sure about this? No second thoughts about marrying a man who spends his days underground. No second thoughts, she said firmly. Though I might have a few suggestions about career changes once we're settled. Such as? Well, Jake mentioned something about railroad work. Steady employment above ground. Building something that connects places instead of just digging holes in them. Benjamin considered this, his arm still around Catherine's waist. Railroad work, huh? That's not a bad idea. Course, it might mean traveling to where the work is, at least for a while. I can live with traveling. What I can't live with is worrying every day that the man I love is trapped under tons of rock. Then railroad work it is. He kissed the top of her head, leaving a small smudge of dirt in her hair. Mrs. Hartwell is going to be a very practical woman. Mrs. Hartwell is going to be a very happy woman, she corrected. As they walked back toward town together, the sun began to set behind the black hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. In 2 hours, Catherine Wells would become Catherine Hartwell in a ceremony that would bind two lives together in ways neither of them had expected when this whole arrangement began. But walking through the dusty streets of Deadwood with Benjamin's arm around her, and the certain knowledge that they had chosen each other freely, Catherine realized that sometimes the best futures were the ones you built together, one honest decision at a time. Behind them, the mine entrance stood open like a wound in the earth, but the men who had been trapped there were safe. And ahead of them lay a wedding, a marriage, and a life that would be whatever they had the courage to make it. The kitchen chair that had started everything sat empty in the corner, forgotten as Catherine stood in Miriam's bedroom wearing her wedding dress and trying not to cry. "Hold still, dear," Miriam said gently, working to fasten the dozens of tiny pearl buttons that ran up the back of Catherine's gown. "We're almost finished." Through the bedroom window, they could hear the sounds of Deadwood preparing for the evening's celebration. Townspeople were gathering outside the church, their voices carrying on the cool October air. Lanterns were being lit along Main Street, casting warm circles of light that would guide wedding guests through the darkness. But inside Miriam's small bedroom, tension crackled like electricity before a storm. "I can't believe you're going through with this charade," Mrs. Pemberton said from her position by the door, where she'd stationed herself like a guard preparing for battle. "It's not too late to come to your senses, Catherine." "My senses are perfectly fine, thank you." Catherine's voice remained steady, though Miriam could feel the slight tremor in her shoulders. "I'm marrying the man I love in exactly 1 hour." "Love?" Mrs. Pemberton spat the word like something bitter. "You've known him for 4 days. What you're feeling is relief and gratitude, not love. There's a significant difference." Miriam's fingers paused on the buttons. She'd been trying to stay out of the family argument, but Mrs. Pemberton's casual dismissal of Catherine's feelings struck too close to home. "With respect, Mrs. Pemberton," she said quietly, "some people know their hearts faster than others, and some people spend so much time analyzing their feelings that they forget to actually feel them. Are you suggesting I don't understand matters of the heart? I'm suggesting that love isn't always convenient or practical or easy to explain to other people. Sometimes it just is." Mrs. Pemberton's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Mrs. Hartwell, you've been encouraging this foolishness from the beginning. But you seem to forget that Catherine is my responsibility, not yours." "Actually," Catherine said, turning to face her aunt despite Miriam's protests about the unfinished buttons, "I'm nobody's responsibility but my own. I'm 23 years old, and I've been making my own decisions since Papa died. Poor decisions, clearly. Maybe, but they're my decisions to make." Catherine's voice grew stronger with each word. "You can disapprove all you like, Aunt Margaret, but you can't stop me from marrying Benjamin." "Can't I?" Mrs. Pemberton's smile was sharp as broken glass. "I've already sent a telegram to Mr. Whitmore's attorney, accepting his proposal on your behalf. The arrangements are being made for your return to Chicago immediately after this wedding nonsense is concluded." The silence that followed was so complete that Miriam could hear her own heartbeat. Catherine went very still, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. "You did what?" Catherine's voice was barely above a whisper. "I made the practical choice you seem incapable of making yourself. Mr. Whitmore's attorney has assured me that he can obtain an annulment of any hasty frontier marriage, particularly one entered into under such irregular circumstances." Miriam felt something cold and dangerous unfurl in her chest. "Mrs. Pemberton, you've just confessed to fraud. Accepting a marriage proposal on behalf of another adult without their consent is illegal, even in Chicago. It's family protection, not fraud. Catherine is clearly not competent to make rational decisions about her future." "The only person who's not competent in this room," Catherine said with deadly calm, "is the woman who thinks she can control other people's lives like chess pieces." Before Mrs. Pemberton could respond, a soft knock interrupted the confrontation. Dr. Morrison's voice came through the door. "Ladies, I hate to intrude, but Benjamin sent me to check on Catherine. He's getting worried that something might be wrong." "Everything's fine," Catherine called back, though her voice shook slightly. "Tell Benjamin I'll see him at the altar in 45 minutes. "Will do." "Oh, and Mrs. Hartwell? Your son cleans up remarkably well. Half the unmarried women in town are sighing over how handsome he looks in his Sunday suit. After his footsteps faded down the hallway, Catherine turned back to her aunt with renewed determination. Aunt Margaret, I need you to send another telegram immediately. Cancel whatever arrangements you made with Mr. Whitmore's attorney and inform them that I've declined his proposal. I will do no such thing. Then I'll send the telegram myself after the wedding. But understand this, if you try to interfere with my marriage or my life in any way, you'll never see me again. Not in Chicago, not anywhere else. The finality in Catherine's voice seemed to register with Mrs. Pemberton for the first time. She studied her niece's face as if seeing a stranger. You've changed, she said finally. The Catherine I knew would never have spoken to me this way. You're right. The Catherine you knew was afraid of being alone in the world, so she let other people make decisions for her. But that Catherine died somewhere between Chicago and Deadwood. Catherine straightened her shoulders. The woman standing here now chooses her own path. Mrs. Pemberton was quiet for a long moment, her face working through emotions that ranged from anger to something that might have been grief. Very well, she said finally. But don't come crying to me when this frontier fantasy crumbles around you. Some lessons can only be learned through bitter experience. She swept from the room, leaving Catherine and Miriam alone in the sudden quiet. Are you all right? Miriam asked gently. Catherine sank into the chair by the window, her wedding dress pooling around her like white water. I keep waiting to feel terrible about what just happened, to feel guilty or frightened or something. But all I feel is free. Freedom can be frightening in its own way. Not this time. Catherine looked up, meeting Miriam's eyes. For the first time in my life, I made a choice based on what I wanted, not what someone else thought I should want. It feels powerful. Miriam resumed fastening the pearl buttons, her fingers working with practiced efficiency. Benjamin is going to be very proud of you. Do you think we'll be happy? Really happy. Not just content or comfortable. The question hung in the air like incense, heavy with hope and uncertainty. Miriam thought about her own marriage, about the 7 years of genuine joy she'd shared with Benjamin's father before fever took him away. I think, she said carefully, that you'll be as happy as you have the courage to be. Happiness isn't something that just happens to you, Catherine. It's something you build together, day by day, choice by choice. And if we make mistakes, then you'll learn from them and do better the next time. That's what marriage is. Two people helping each other become the best versions of themselves. Through the window, the church bells began to ring, calling the wedding guests to take their seats. In 30 minutes, Catherine would walk down the aisle of Deadwood's small church and bind her life to Benjamin's in front of God and the community they'd chosen to call home. Miriam, Catherine said suddenly, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. Do you think I'm good enough for Benjamin? Not financially or socially, but as a person. Do you think I can make him happy? Miriam's hands stilled on the final button. The question revealed the heart of Catherine's deepest fear. Not that she was making the wrong choice, but that she wasn't worthy of the choice she'd made. Catherine Wells, she said firmly, you are exactly what my son needs. Someone brave enough to choose love over security. Someone strong enough to stand up for what she believes in. Someone honest enough to admit when she's afraid, but determined enough to face that fear anyway. Even though I come with nothing? No dowry, no family support, no practical skills for frontier life. Especially because of that, you're choosing Benjamin for who he is, not for what he can provide. That's the rarest gift anyone can offer. The gift of being wanted for yourself alone. Catherine smiled, the first genuine smile she'd worn since her aunt's revelation about the telegram. Then let's go get me married to the finest man in Dakota Territory. As they prepared to leave the bedroom, Miriam caught sight of the empty kitchen chair in the corner. Tomorrow, that chair would have a new mistress, a young woman who'd learned the difference between being assigned a place and claiming the place where she belonged. But tonight, it stood as a reminder that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with weapons or wealth, but with the simple courage to refuse to be diminished by others' expectations. The church doors opened at precisely 6 o'clock, and what Catherine saw inside made her forget every worry, every fear, and every doubt she'd carried for the past week. Candlelight flickered from every surface. Window sills, the altar rail, even the wooden pews where Deadwood's residents sat waiting with expectant faces. Someone had gathered armfuls of autumn leaves and late-blooming wildflowers, creating splashes of gold and purple that transformed the simple church into something magical. But it was Benjamin standing at the altar that made Catherine's breath catch in her throat. Dr. Morrison had been right. Benjamin cleaned up remarkably well. His dark hair was freshly cut and combed, his Sunday suit pressed to crisp perfection. But it was the expression on his face as he watched her enter the church that made her knees weak. He looked at her like she was the answer to prayers he'd been afraid to voice. "Ready," Miriam whispered beside her. Catherine nodded, not trusting her voice. They'd decided that Miriam would walk her down the aisle, since Catherine's uncle had made it clear he wouldn't participate in what he called this frontier nonsense. As they began the slow procession toward the altar, Catherine noticed details that filled her heart with unexpected warmth. Jake Morrison sat in the front row, his wife beside him for the first time since her illness. The Henderson family occupied an entire pew, baby Mary gurgling contentedly in her mother's arms. Even Tommy Richardson was there, his broken leg propped on a chair but his face bright with celebration. These weren't the wealthy, sophisticated guests who might have attended a Chicago wedding. These were working people who'd chosen to spend their Saturday evening celebrating the marriage of two people they'd known for less than a week. The generosity of it overwhelmed her. Halfway down the aisle, she spotted Mrs. Pemberton sitting ramrod straight in the back corner, her face a mask of polite disapproval. But Mr. Pemberton surprised everyone by standing as Catherine passed, offering a small nod that might have been respect. "Dearly beloved," the minister began once Catherine reached the altar. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Benjamin Hartwell and Catherine Wells in holy matrimony." The familiar words washed over Catherine like a blessing, but her attention remained fixed on Benjamin's face. He was looking at her with such intensity that she felt as if they were the only two people in the room. "Do you, Benjamin, take Catherine to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do." Benjamin's voice was steady and sure. "I choose Catherine freely, and I promise to love and respect her every day of our lives together." The addition to the traditional vows surprised everyone, including the minister, but no one objected. "Do you, Catherine, take Benjamin to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" Catherine looked into Benjamin's eyes and saw their entire future reflected there. The struggles they'd face, the joys they'd share, the life they'd build together one honest choice at a time. "I do. I choose Benjamin freely, and I promise to stand beside him through whatever comes, as his partner and his equal." Another departure from tradition, but this time several people in the congregation murmured approval. "The rings?" the minister asked. Benjamin reached into his pocket and withdrew two simple gold bands, nothing fancy, but solid and honest like everything else about him. As he slipped the ring onto Catherine's finger, she noticed his hands were trembling slightly. When Catherine placed the matching band on Benjamin's finger, she whispered something only he could hear. "Thank you for waiting for me. By the power vested in me by the territory of Dakota, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Benjamin, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle, almost shy, but it sealed something between them that went deeper than legal contracts or social arrangements. When they separated, both were smiling through tears they hadn't expected to shed. "Ladies and gentlemen," the minister announced, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin Hartwell." The cheer that went up from the congregation could probably be heard 3 blocks away. Rice began flying from all directions. Where the townspeople had gotten rice in a frontier mining town, Catherine couldn't imagine, but someone had managed to provide it for the occasion. As they walked back down the aisle together, Catherine caught glimpses of individual faces in the crowd. Dr. Morrison beaming with paternal pride. Jake Morrison wiping his eyes with his sleeve. The Henderson children waving enthusiastically despite their parents' attempts to maintain proper decorum. And in the back corner, Mrs. Pemberton sitting alone, her face unreadable. Outside the church, the celebration continued with music and dancing in the street. Someone had brought a fiddle, someone else a guitar, and soon half the town was dancing to lively tunes that echoed off the surrounding buildings. "Mrs. Hartwell," Benjamin said, pulling Catherine into his arms for their first dance as husband and wife. "How does it feel to be married to a miner?" "Actually," she said, smiling up at him, "I'm married to a future railroad worker. Remember, we decided you're changing careers, right? How does it feel to be married to a future railroad worker with no money, no prospects, and a tendency to get trapped underground?" "It feels perfect," she said honestly. "It feels like coming home." As they danced, Miriam watched from the church steps, her heart full of emotions she couldn't quite name. Pride in her son for choosing love over security. Gratitude for Catherine's courage in defying her family's expectations. Relief that the complicated week had ended with genuine happiness for two people she'd grown to care about deeply. "Beautiful wedding," Dr. Morrison said, joining her on the steps. "Beautiful couple," she replied. "They're going to be happy, Samuel. Really, truly happy." "I believe you're right." He paused, studying her face in the lantern light. "And what about you, Miriam? Are you happy?" The question surprised her. "Of course I'm happy. My son just married a wonderful woman." "That's not what I asked." She considered his words, thinking about the empty boarding house that awaited her, the quiet breakfasts for one, the gradual transition from mother to mother-in-law. "I'm content," she said finally. "Benjamin has found his path, and Catherine has found her strength. They don't need me to take care of them anymore." Being needed and being wanted are two different things entirely. Before she could ask what he meant, Mrs. Pemberton appeared beside them, her traveling cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "Mrs. Hartwell, I wanted to inform you that my husband and I will be departing on tomorrow's stagecoach. We see no reason to prolong our stay in Deadwood." "I'm sorry to hear that," Miriam replied, though she wasn't sure if she meant it. "I trust you'll keep an eye on Catherine. She's made her choice, but she's still very young and inexperienced in the ways of the world. Catherine can take care of herself. She's proven that quite thoroughly." Mrs. Pemberton was quiet for a moment, watching her niece dance with obvious joy in her new husband's arms. "Perhaps you're right," she said finally. "Perhaps we all underestimated what she was capable of." It was the closest thing to an apology they were likely to get, and Miriam accepted it with a gracious nod. As the evening wore on and the celebration showed no signs of ending, Catherine found herself reflecting on the kitchen chair that had started this whole journey. She'd been so worried about where she was supposed to sit, so focused on finding her assigned place in someone else's arrangement. But sitting wasn't the point. The point was standing up for what you believed in, choosing your own path, and refusing to be diminished by others' expectations. Tomorrow, she and Benjamin would begin their life together in earnest. There would be challenges, money to earn, a household to establish, the inevitable adjustments that came with merging two lives into one. But tonight, dancing under the Dakota stars with her husband's arms around her and the warm wishes of their new community surrounding them, Catherine knew she'd made the right choice. She'd found her place at last, not by accepting where others thought she belonged, but by claiming where she chose to stand. In the end, that made all the difference.